Montana Territory, July 1883. The wind had teeth that morning, even in the middle of July. Up in the Judith Basin, the sun had barely cleared the ridgeline when the cold snapped at Halia Ellsworth's fingers as she tightened the cinch on her mare. Out here, the sky stretched too wide, and the silence had a way of making a person feel either found or forgotten. Halia had been both. She glanced back once at the small cabin tucked against a patch of pine, where two small faces pressed against the windowpane her children, Daisy and Dean. 8 and 6. Too young to understand why their father had left 2 winters ago and never come back. Too young to know how close she had come to not making it through the last one, but they were hers and she had done what she had to. She had hunted, trapped, bartered. Hauled wood until her back gave out. And when nothing else worked, she wrote a letter. She had not expected him to come, but he did. His name was Merritt Evans. He rode in from the east 2 days ago, dust in his beard and a rifle slung across his back. His coat was worn, the cuffs frayed, and his horse looked like it had seen one too many bad roads. But he had the same eyes he used to, sharp and steady, with that pull in them that made it hard for her to breathe. Halia had not seen Merritt since they were 17, back when her hair was longer and her heart had been whole. Back when he used to climb the cottonwood outside her window and tap on the pane just to make her laugh. But then life had happened. Her father died sudden, her mother packed them west. Merritt had stayed behind in Missouri. She married Samuel Ellsworth, and Merritt disappeared into the war. Now here he was in her yard, holding her letter in one hand and his hat in the other. "You said you needed help," he said, eyes not leaving hers. "So I came." She should have shut the door. But she didn't. Now, 2 days later, they were riding out together to check a trapline he had reset near the creek. Daisy and Dean had begged to come, but Halia had promised them pancakes if they stayed put and watched the fire. She figured it was a fair deal. Merritt rode beside her, quiet, like he always had been. He did not ask questions she did not want to answer. Just watched the trail, watched the trees, watched her when he thought she wouldn't notice. "You remembered the old line," she said finally, nodding toward the creek bed winding below the ridge. "I remembered everything," he said, just like that. She looked away. They reached the trap by midday. One of the snares had caught a hare and Merritt cleaned it quick, hands sure and practiced. Halia caught herself watching the way he moved, the way he wiped his knife clean on a patch of grass, the way he glanced up and offered her the better cut without a word. They cooked it over a fire in the shadow of a bluff, the scent curling warm through the air. "You married," he said after a long silence. "I did." His eyes flicked to her left hand, bare now. "He left, didn't say goodbye, just gone one day," he nodded, jaw tight. "You?" "No one waiting for me," he said. "Never was." They ate in silence after that, but something had shifted. Halia felt it. Like a door she had boarded up long ago had creaked open just a little. When they rode back toward the cabin, the sky had turned gold. The children came running out the moment they saw the horses, Dean stumbling over his boots, Daisy laughing, arms flung wide. Merritt dismounted and crouched low as Dean barreled into him, and Halia watched as Merritt lifted the boy up like he weighed nothing. "You a cowboy?" Dean asked, eyes wide. "Something like that," Merritt said, ruffling the boy's hair. Daisy stood back, more cautious. "Are you going to stay?" Merritt looked at Halia. "If your mama wants me to," he said. Halia opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at her daughter, then at Merritt. "You hungry?" she asked. Merritt smiled, small but real. "Always." They ate rabbit stew that night. Merritt told the children a story about a horse that hated water, and Dean laughed so hard he spilled his cup. Halia watched her children's faces, the way the light hit Merritt's cheekbones, and something in her chest that had been cold for a long time started to warm. Later, when the children were asleep and the fire burned low, Merritt stood to leave. "You can stay in the barn," she said, avoiding his eyes. "I will." He paused at the door. "Thank you for writing me," he said, voice low. "I almost didn't." "I am glad you did." And then he was gone into the dark. Halia cleaned the dishes with shaking hands. The next morning they worked side by side. He fixed a broken hinge on the chicken coop. She patched the roof. He carried water from the well without being asked. They did not talk much, but the silence was not heavy anymore. That night, after the children were in bed, he knocked on the doorframe. "I found something," he said. She followed him outside. He led her to the edge of the pasture where the old apple tree stood, the one her husband had always said he would cut down but never did. At the base of the tree was a small wooden box. She pulled it open. Inside were sketches, old ones, from when she was a girl. Drawings she had made of the hills, the creek, the horses, and one of Merritt sitting under that same tree, chin in his hand. "I thought these were gone," she whispered. "They were under the floorboards in the old loft," he said. "I guess you forgot them." "I forget a lot of things now. Some things stay, even if you try to forget." She looked up at him then. "Merritt," she said, voice catching. "Why did you come?" He stepped closer. "Because I never stopped loving you," he said. She did not answer. Just stood there, heart pounding, feeling like the ground beneath her had shifted. But she did not move away when he reached for her hand, and she did not pull back when his fingers brushed hers. The first frost settled early that year, tracing silver across the rooftops before the end of August. It crept into Halia's bones as she stood outside before dawn, watching Merritt drive the last nails into the new lean-to. The barn had been sagging for years, and she'd stopped hoping anyone would fix it, but Merritt didn't ask what needed doing, he just did it. He didn't speak unless there was something worth saying, and she'd learned to trust the quiet between them. It wasn't empty. She handed him another board and stepped back to keep watch over the horizon. The dogs hadn't barked, but she'd grown used to reading the land itself. The way the wind shifted, the way the cattle moved, something was off. She didn't say it aloud. Merritt already knew. He paused mid-swing, listening. "Riders?" he asked. "Could be," she said. He didn't press. Just lowered the hammer and looked toward the east ridge. The children were still asleep. She could hear their soft breathing through the open window behind her. Merritt stepped down from the beam and brushed the sawdust from his sleeves. "I'll ride out," he said. She shook her head. "Not alone." He studied her a moment, then nodded once. They saddled up without another word. The trail beyond the field bent north, climbing in switchbacks through tall grass and scattered aspen. They rode side by side, Merritt slightly ahead, rifle slung low across his saddle. Halia kept hers on her hip. They crested the ridge just as the sun cut through the trees, and there they were. 4 men huddled near a fire. Not hunters, not neighbors. Their horses were lean and restless, and their voices carried too loud for men with nowhere to be. Merritt turned in his saddle. "Trouble? They've been watching," Halia said. "I saw smoke yesterday, thought it might be from the mining trail, too far west for that." They circled down behind the rise and tied off the horses near a patch of scrub oak. Merritt crouched low, eyes fixed on the men below. "Recognize any of them?" he asked. She scanned their faces. One of them had a crooked jaw she remembered from Town Miles Godfrey, a card cheat who'd been run off the year before last. She didn't know the others, but they all wore the same look. Men who'd stopped pretending they worked for a living. "They're not here to trade," she said. "No," Merritt agreed. "They're here to take." He didn't ask what she wanted to do. He waited. "Go back," she said. "Get the children. If they come down the trail, I'll stall them." He didn't move. "You think I can't handle it?" "I think you shouldn't have to." She didn't answer that, just turned back toward the horses. They made it to the cabin by mid-morning. Merritt settled Daisy and Dean in the root cellar with a blanket, a jar of water, and a lantern. Halia barred the door and stood in the kitchen, loading her revolver with hands that didn't shake. They waited. The knock came just past noon. Not loud, not hurried. A man's voice called out, casual as if he were asking for sugar. Halia opened the door halfway. Merritt stood behind her, silent. The man on the porch was tall, lean, with a coat too fine for someone living honest. A silver concho glinted from his belt. "Afternoon," he said, tipping his hat with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Heard there was a lady running this place alone." "You heard wrong." He glanced at Merritt, then back to her. "Name's Silas Grieve. My boys and I are just passing through, thought we'd ask for a warm meal and a place to rest." No room, she said. Sure there is, he said, taking a step forward. Merritt moved, then quick and quiet. He placed himself between her and the stranger. You'll want to head back the way you came, he said. Silas didn't blink. You got some kind of claim here, friend? Merritt didn't answer. The silence stretched. Silas's smile thinned. Well, guess we'll see ourselves out. He turned, slow and deliberate, and walked back down the path. The others followed, but not before the one with the crooked jaw gave Halia a look that made her skin crawl. They rode off without a word. Later that night, Merritt sat on the porch, oiling his rifle. Halia brought him a cup of coffee and sat beside him, arms wrapped around herself against the chill. You think they'll be back? She asked. Not tonight, he said. But yes. I don't have much left for them to take. They don't want things. He didn't say what they did want. He didn't have to. She watched the stars come out one by one. I can't run, Merritt. Not with the children. I'm not asking you to. She turned toward him. Why are you still here? He didn't look at her, just set the rifle down and leaned back on his hands. I've done things, he said. Things I won't speak of, but when I got your letter, I figured maybe I could do one thing right. Her voice was quiet. You think marrying me is the right thing? I don't think it's about right or wrong. I think it's about standing between you and whatever comes through that door. She didn't answer. She didn't look away either. You don't have to mean it, he said. Not now. But if you say the words, they'll think twice. She stared at the dark horizon, and if I do mean it, then I'll never stop standing there. Her heart beat like hooves on dry ground. She reached for his hand, her fingers cold against his. Then you'd better ask properly. He turned to her. Will you marry me? No ring. He stood, walked inside, and returned with something wrapped in cloth. He held it out. She unfolded the linen and found a silver ring shaped from an old coin, edges smoothed by time. I made it, he said. Years ago. Didn't know if I'd ever see you again. She slid it on her finger. It fits. He exhaled, slow and deep, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Peace. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and smoke. She leaned into him, head resting against his shoulder. They stayed that way until the moon rose high and the cabin behind them grew still. There was no ceremony, no preacher. Just the stars above and the quiet promise between them, and that was enough. The first snow came before mid-September, light as sifted flour, brushing the rooftops and fencing wire. It didn't stay long, but it warned the land of what was coming. The days shortened. The air thinned. Everything in the basin began to ready itself. Inside the cabin, Merritt worked quietly at the hearth, fixing a bent hinge on the ash bin. Halia stood near the table with a length of muslin stretched across her lap, needles slipping through the fabric in slow, sure motions. She was making Daisy a new winter dress from fabric traded the week before. Her fingers moved with the confidence of repetition, but her thoughts didn't stay with the thread. Merritt set the hinge down and flexed his hand, knuckles stiff from the morning's cold. He glanced at her. You always so that quiet, I'm thinking. He leaned back against the stone, arms crossed. About what? If the snow sets in early, I'll need to smoke more meat, and we've got only 1 barrel of salt left. I can head to Fort Benton in the morning, take a few pelts. Might fetch enough for what we need. It's a 5-day ride. I'll take the shorter trail through the pass. That's not a trail, that's a gamble. He didn't answer right away. She could hear the pine logs snapping in the stove behind him. I've taken worse gambles, he said finally. She laid the fabric aside and met his eyes. Dean's fever broke last night, he nodded once. That's good. He asked if you were going to be his father. Merritt didn't move. What did you tell him? I said you were already the one keeping him safe. Merritt walked over to the table and picked up one of Daisy's carved toys, a rough-hewn horse he'd whittled last week. No papers, no preacher, he said. You sure that's enough for you? I haven't needed a preacher to know who I trust. He set the toy down gently, then turned toward the door. I'll leave at first light. She watched him step out into the cold. He left without waking the children. By the time the sound of hooves faded from the trail, the sky had already lightened to pewter. Halia stood on the porch, shawl pulled tight, watching where the trail curved into the trees. She didn't wave. He hadn't looked back. That night, she boiled the last of the beans and tucked Daisy and Dean into the loft with extra quilts. The wind scraped against the windows. She sat by the fire long after they were asleep, the silence of the cabin so complete it made her feel like the only soul left in the world. 3 days passed without word. On the 4th, Halia rose before dawn and saddled the mule. She packed dry biscuits, a small sack of oats, and her rifle. She didn't tell the children where she was going. She left a note in case she didn't return by nightfall, and she locked the cellar door from the outside. The trail through the pass was narrow and half-choked with fallen limbs. She followed hoof tracks where she could, moving slow where the snow had drifted. The wind funneled hard through the rocks, and by midday her hands were raw and stinging. Near the edge of a frozen creek, she found his horse. Alone, tied to a tree, reins slack, saddle askew, there was no blood, no sign of a struggle. But the tracks led north, away from the pass, into a narrow gulch she didn't recognize. She tethered the mule and followed on foot. She found Merritt slumped against a rock wall, one leg bent beneath him, rifle across his lap. His eyes were open, but he didn't speak. "Merritt," she said, falling to her knees beside him. He blinked slowly. "Didn't think you'd come. You didn't come back." He winced as she moved his coat aside. A long gash ran from his ribs to his hip, packed with snow and cloth. "They caught me watching their camp," he said. "Didn't get a clean shot, but I got one of them." She didn't ask who. She didn't care. "I'm getting you out of here. Can't walk. Then I'll carry you." He gave a low breath, not quite a laugh. "You can't. Watch me." She made a stretcher from branches and her coat, tied it to the mule, and dragged him back to the trail. It took most of the day. By the time they reached the ridge above the cabin, the sky had turned slate-colored and the first real snow was falling. Inside, she boiled water and cleaned the wound with strong whiskey. He didn't cry out. He didn't flinch. He just watched her with those steady eyes, the pain in them only visible around the edges. "You should have waited," he said. "I don't wait." She stitched the wound in silence. That night she slept in the chair beside the bed, her hand resting against his. When he woke the next morning, fevered and half-dreaming, he reached for her. "I was going to bring you a ring," he murmured. "One with blue stone, like your eyes." "You brought yourself back," she said. "That's enough." "No, it ain't." He drifted back into sleep. The snow deepened. For 5 days he didn't rise. She fed him broth in spoonfuls. She read to the children by the fire and kept the rifle beside the door. Once she saw a figure near the edge of the woods, a rider watching. Then gone. She didn't tell Merritt. On the 6th day the fever broke. He sat up by mid-afternoon, hands shaking but his eyes clear. "You look like death," she told him. "And you look like someone who dragged a grown man through the woods." She poured him a cup of tea and he sipped it slowly. "I never meant to bring danger here," he said. "You didn't bring it. It was coming anyway." His voice dropped. "There's more of them. The one I shot, he wasn't the worst of the lot." "I know." He reached for her hand. His grip was weak, but his thumb brushed the base of her palm, slow and deliberate. "You still wearing that ring?" he asked. She held up her hand. "Good," he said. Next morning she found him standing in the yard, coat pulled tight, balancing against the porch post. "You should be resting." "They won't wait for me to heal." She stared at him a long moment, then nodded. They spent the next days readying the place, reinforcing shutters, doubling the locks, showing Daisy how to light the lanterns if the fire went out, teaching Dean how to stay low, how to listen. Merritt moved slow, but he moved. And in the quiet hours after the children slept, they sat by the fire and spoke of things neither had ever said aloud. He told her about the years after the war, when he rode with men he didn't trust because he didn't know how to be alone. She told him about the winter after Samuel disappeared, when she had nothing left to trade and had to decide whether to eat the last chicken or let the children go hungry. They never spoke of love, but it sat between them, quiet and steady, like a fire that didn't need tending. One night, as wind howled outside and the shutters rattled like bones, Merritt took her hand in his and didn't let go. "If they come, I want you to take the children and go. They're not taking this place from me. I'm not talking about the land." She looked at him, eyes narrowed. "This isn't just land," she said. "This is the only place I've ever stood still. And you're here." He closed his eyes, forehead resting against hers. "I'll stand with you." She nodded once, and in that moment she knew the war wasn't over, but she wasn't fighting it alone anymore. The snow deepened fast, heavy and wet, blanketing the basin in a silence that muffled every hoofbeat and snapped twig. By late October, only the tops of the fence posts showed over the drifts. The cabin groaned under the weight of it, but it held. Merritt had reinforced the roof with new timbers before his wound had fully healed, refusing to let Halia lift more than she had to. She hadn't argued, not because she couldn't, but because she understood what it meant to him to fix what had once been left to rot. Inside, they kept to a rhythm that had begun to feel like something close to a life. Halia rose first each morning, coaxing the fire back to life while the wind still howled through the chimney. Merritt would come down from the loft with Dean on his hip, claiming the boy had tricked him again into carrying him. Daisy, too grown now to be carried, would sit near the hearth and trace shapes in the frost-laced window panes while Halia stirred oats or fried salt pork when they had it. They didn't speak of the men Halia had seen watching from the woods. They didn't speak of the blood Merritt had left behind near the pass. But even unspoken, it lived in every cautious glance toward the tree line, in the way Merritt kept the rifle loaded near the door instead of mounted on the wall. That morning, Halia was mending a tear in Dean's trousers when Merritt came in from the barn, brushing snow from his shoulders. She didn't look up until he tossed something wrapped in hide onto the table. "Found it under the floorboards in the back stall," he said. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a rusted tin box sealed with wax that cracked under her fingernail. Letters. 6 of them, folded and yellowed, the ink faded to a brown whisper. She turned one over, her name. Written in Samuel's hand, Merritt didn't say anything, just leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Halia unfolded the first letter and read it in the quiet, then the next, and the next. When her hands began to shake, she laid them down and pressed her palms flat against the table. "He was planning to leave," she said. "Not just me, the children, the land. Said he'd made deals he couldn't walk back, that they'd come looking." "Who?" She looked up. "Sela's Grieve." Merritt's jaw tightened. "He owed them," she said. "Land money, maybe more. And when he couldn't pay, he ran, and left you to face the debt. He didn't think I'd survive." Merritt stepped forward, voice low. "You did more than survive." She nodded once, sharp and steady. That night, Merritt sat Daisy and Dean by the fire and told them how to listen for certain sounds, how snow muffled footfalls, how sometimes the creak of a tree wasn't just the wind. Halia didn't interrupt him. She watched the way Daisy leaned forward, serious and quiet, and how Dean held one of Merritt's shirt buttons in his fist like a talisman. After they were asleep, she found Merritt outside, sharpening a blade by lantern light. The wind had quieted, the sky cleared. "I know what they want now," she said. He didn't look up. "Do you?" "They want the land. Or revenge for what Samuel promised and didn't deliver. Either way, they're not going to stop." He tested the blade against his thumb. "No, they won't." She stepped closer. "I don't want to run." "I won't. I never thought you would." She looked out toward the trees where the dark pressed up against the snow. "I want you to teach me how to shoot properly, not just the rifle, the revolver too." He studied her a moment, then nodded. "Tomorrow morning. We'll start with the small one." She didn't thank him. She didn't have to. They trained every day after that. He showed her how to brace her stance, how not to overcorrect for the kickback, how to read the wind, how to disassemble and clean the cylinder without losing a spring. Her hands blistered. Her aim improved. By the 3rd week, she could hit a knot in the elm tree from 20 paces. Daisy watched from the porch sometimes, eyes wide but silent. Dean tried once to sneak a shot and was swiftly sat down and given a long talk about responsibility, not from Merritt, but from Halia. The snow kept falling, but the days began to stretch again, a little more light with each dawn. When the sap started to run in the trees, Merritt rode out alone to check the far traps. He was gone a full day. When he returned, his coat was torn and his knuckles raw. "I saw one of them," he said, handing her the rifle as he stepped down from the horse. "They're close, but they're watching, not acting." Yet, that night Halia laid the letters from Samuel into the fire one by one. She didn't read them again. She didn't need to carry what he'd left behind. She and Merritt kept a lamp burning in the front window after that, not for warmth, not for hope. But as a warning at twilight, Merritt brought her outside and pointed toward the lower field. "Tracks," he said. "Just on the edge, one man, maybe two, watching the cabin." She didn't speak. She simply turned and walked back toward the house. That evening she laid out her coat and boots by the door, trimmed the lantern wicks, checked the rifle's chamber. Merritt came up behind her, hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "You scared?" "No," he turned her to face him. "I am." She looked into his eyes, the same ones that had once watched her from a cottonwood branch when the world felt simpler. "You don't have to be," she said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small pouch. Inside was a ring. Not the one she wore already, the makeshift coin band he'd given her weeks ago, but a real one. Silver, plain, with a single garnet set into the band. "I traded the last of the beaver pelts for it 3 days ago," he said. "I wasn't sure if it was the right time." She didn't touch it. Just watched the way he held it, careful, like something that could be lost forever if dropped. "This is a real proposal," he said. "I know." He waited. She reached for the ring and slid it onto her finger. It fit. "You're mine now," she said. "I always was." He kissed her then, not tentative. Not hesitant. Like a man who knew what he had been waiting for. When the moon rose, they stood on the porch with the lamp behind them, two shadows cast long across the snow. They didn't speak of the men in the trees. They didn't speak of what might come. They simply stood, side by side, and waited. The thaw came slow that year, but it came. Drifts sank inch by inch under the weight of longer days and warmer air, and water threaded down from the ridges in thin, clear rivulets. The trees remained bare, but the land had begun its long breath inward, the kind that meant growth was coming. It filled the cabin with a kind of quiet expectancy, not unlike the stillness before a storm, only this time it didn't feel like fear. It felt like waiting for something good. Merritt patched the last of the fence-a-line along the northern slope, while Halia dug through what seed she had left. The earth near the orchard was still too wet to turn, but she'd tested it each morning with her boot heel, watching for softness. The children helped where they could, dragging kindling, hauling small buckets from the creek, their laughter a small miracle after the hush of winter. The men never returned, not that first week, not the second, not even after the snows vanished from the lowlands. Merritt still carried his rifle when he rode out, and Halia kept a loaded revolver tucked behind the flour sack, but their grips on both had less tension now. Not complacency, just something like peace. One evening, Merritt sat on the porch with a small wooden box on his lap. The light was blue with the end of day, and Halia was braiding Daisy's hair with fingers that no longer trembled from cold or exhaustion. He turned the box toward her and opened it. Inside lay a small brass key, dulled with age. "I found this in the barn, under the rafters," he said. "Fits the old cedar chest in the loft." She raised an eyebrow. "I thought that thing was nailed shut." "So did I." She took the key and tucked it into her apron without asking more. That night, after the children were asleep, she lit a stub of candle and climbed into the loft. The chest sat where it always had, its lid warped slightly from time and dry air. She turned the key once, and the lock gave way with a soft click. Inside were remnants of her mother's life lace collarings, a rosary missing half its beads, a patchwork square she remembered being stitched during long train rides west. Beneath those, she found a bundle of papers tied with twine. Deeds, receipts. One folded map with her father's name scrawled in the corner. She carried them down to the table and spread them out beneath the lantern glow. Merritt leaned over her shoulder. "Looks like your father held more land than anyone realized," he said. "Some of it still marked under your name." Halia traced the outline. That's past the creek, near the bluff. Good grazing land, she sat back. I never thought to check. Most people don't look for things they've already given up on. She didn't answer. Just folded the map again and set it aside. 3 days later, Merritt rode into town. He returned with seed oats, flour, and a small parcel of fabric for Daisy's dress. But more than that, he brought news. Silas Greaves dead, he said simply, after they'd unloaded the wagon. Shot outside a saloon in Helena 2 weeks ago, some argument over a card game. She didn't look up from the grain sack she was tying. You sure? Sheriff had papers posted, face matched. She tied the knot tighter. Then it's over. Merritt stepped closer. There's no one else looking. I asked. She nodded once. Good. That night they climbed the ridge behind the cabin. The stars hung low and heavy and the wind had gone still. I've been thinking, Merritt said, hands in his coat pockets. About that extra land, me too, could put cows on it. Not many, but enough to trade come fall. She tilted her head. You already planning the winter? I'm planning next year. They stood quiet for a moment, listening to the water running faint below the ridge, the kind of sound you only noticed when everything else had settled. I never thought I'd stay in one place this long, he said. You're not stuck. I know. She turned toward him, watching the way the moonlight caught the side of his face, silvering the stubble along his jaw. I used to think I couldn't trust someone who left, she said. But it's harder sometimes to trust someone who stays. Merritt didn't speak, just waited. It's not that I don't believe you, she said. It's that I do. I'm not going anywhere. She stepped closer until her coat brushed his. I know. He reached for her hand then, not tentative. Not unsure, just steady. His thumb traced the inside of her wrist and she leaned into him with a sigh that felt like something long held finally let go. They kissed beneath the stars without urgency, without fear. It wasn't the beginning. It was the middle fully realized, and it felt like home. Spring ripened slowly, and they worked the land together. Merritt built a new chicken run while Halia and Daisy planted rows of beans and turnips. Dean followed Merritt everywhere, asking questions he couldn't always answer, but never tiring of the sound of his boots in the dirt behind him. One morning, Halia found Merritt smoothing a length of wood near the barn, shaping it into a cradle. He didn't say anything when she stopped beside him. He didn't need to. She'd already known, by the time the first wildflowers surfaced, the cabin had changed, not drastically, not loudly. But in ways that mattered. The rugs were cleaner. The shutters never banged loose. There was always a loaf of bread on the hearth, and the windows no longer rattled with wind. One warm evening, Merritt took Halia's ring from her hand and knelt in the field behind the cabin. Not because I think we need a preacher to make it real, he said, but because I want you to know I'd stand up in front of anyone and say it out loud. She knelt beside him. You already did when you came back. They were married in June, under the same apple tree her father had once planted with his own hands. There were no guests, just the children, the wind, and the creek whispering through the grass below. Merritt wore his best shirt, and Halia wore a dress she'd sewn from the parcel he'd brought back in the spring. Daisy braided her mother's hair with wildflowers. Dean carried the small carved horse Merritt had made him that first winter. They spoke no vows. They didn't need to. Afterward, they sat on the porch while the sun dipped low, and Halia rested her hand over her growing belly. Merritt leaned back, legs stretched out, one hand resting over hers. The land had softened. The sky had cleared, and for the first time in years there was nothing more to run from. Just a life ahead, waiting to be lived, and they would live it together.